A number of the founders we've backed in the last several years have been founders who discovered the problem while they were inside another technology company, and they essentially left that company to solve that problem.
There are people who are tinkerers and alpha generators, who are risk takers, and there are people who are reliable workhorses, right? And conflating the two often leads to fatigue and panic. We don't work with large enterprise customers. Where we see the most amount of opportunities working with mid-size, mid-market companies that are very tech-forward. It's not so much a story around, okay, can we go to a company and reduce their headcount by half? Most of the situations that we go into, this workforce doesn't exist.
People posting on social media about when we'll have the first $1 billion one-person company. And with OpenClaw and all of these things, I think we've seen that starting to happen.
A user that's using Scrut in year 3, their experience of using it will not be the same as what it was in year 1, because that context has accumulated over a long time. You'll probably see many startups getting to the $4-5 million ARR scale, but the ones that break out will necessarily have to build those systems that make it reliable. So ability to attract that talent that can build scalable systems is, I think, is going to become a differentiator.
In this age of AI, as you've talked to investors out there, what are they looking for in companies today versus what they were looking for, 4 years ago when you started? Welcome to Lunchbreak with Lightspeed. We have Aayush Ghosh Choudhury today, founder of Scrut Automation. Welcome, Aayush.
Thank you, Dev. Thanks for having me here.
It's been a wonderful journey so far. I know we first met each other in 2021.
Yes.
Through an introduction from Rohit Chenamaneni at Darwin Box, which is, as you know, another one of our portfolio companies. And we really like Rohit for recommending you to us. I think we signed the term sheet 24 hours after we met.
That's right, yes.
And you were, at the seed stage at that time. So that was a record fast transaction for us. But more than the transaction, the relationship over the last 4 years now that we've built has been amazing. I thought we'd sort of maybe segment our conversation into a couple of parts. One is the Scrut Automation story, and especially how you are operating in this age of AI, both internally and then meeting customer demand that has to do with AI. The second thing we can talk about is learnings in building an AI-centric software company that has operations both here in the US as well as in India and other parts of the world. And then finally, we can talk a little bit about AI and how that changes the opportunity for software companies in general. There's been a lot of talk about that, so we will talk about that. So maybe just start off with introducing yourself a little bit, and then maybe end with sort of how you learned about this opportunity in GRC that you're going after and got excited about it.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here. So the journey for us started rather serendipitously because I was working with McKinsey. I worked there for about 3.5 years. For the longest time, I'd wanted to build a career in consulting, rise through the ranks, become a partner. And then for all the usual reasons, I felt restless because I wanted to see what's out there. I wasn't sure if I was willing to commit. So for the longest time, I was trying to be ahead of the curve, get a couple of early promotions. And when those things started falling in place, I felt like I was committing too soon. So I took a rather impulsive call, which is something I wasn't very used to doing earlier because my career so far had followed a certain very well engineered track. Yeah, so I actually left McKinsey a couple of months before my next promotion because I was pretty impulsive then. I joined a very early stage SaaS company, then moved to Bombay. And then somewhere along the journey, working with the other company, I kind of realized that, and I was working with Pando in those days, I realized that if I had to take a risk, the goal was to work with an early stage SaaS company for a few years, understand the SaaS ecosystem better, and then potentially at some point start up on my own. But then somewhere along the journey, I realized that if I had to take a risk, might as well just dive in. What my younger counterparts in here in SF typically call FAFO now, right? So I thought might as well just dive in. So that's how it happened. And Jayesh and I, my co-founder Jayesh, we initially were trying to build a supply chain company, essentially selling into large enterprise customers, helping them manage their procurement flows on top of ERP. We realized after a year of building the product that this was not something that would have scaled the manner in which we would have liked. We pulled out of it. We'd made a bunch of horrible assumptions. But in the course of building that business, we had a series of epiphanies that led us to the idea of Scrut. Because even as a very small team of less than 5 people, we had to work very hard towards demonstrating our compliance towards, say, SOC 2, ISO, GDPR, because we were working with very high quality enterprise customers. And so that pain led to two things. One was we built a bunch of internal tools that helped us be smarter about how we retrieve some of those artifacts. And second, we found Kush through our network. He's our third co-founder, and he's been in the space for the last 15 odd years, doing it in a very service-like manner. Initially in the US, went back to India, ran his consulting business for a while. So overall, I think it was we engaged with him as a consultant, helping us navigate this, and he had an edge to productize what he learned. We came across the problem from first principles, and then a series of epiphanies later, we realized that when it came to compliance and risk management for small and mid-sized tech-forward companies, the urgency around them having to comply with these myriad frameworks is actually pretty real. It didn't exist maybe half a decade ago, but GRC as a category had been very large enterprise focused, and there was a gap that we found was very real and we felt firsthand. So we dived in, and Scrut, that's how Scrut started late 2021. And within a month of going live is when we came in touch as well. The first version of Scrut was essentially just slightly improving what we'd built for our internal consumption as part of a previous startup anyway. But even that found quick traction because the problem was so urgent.
Very interesting pattern match from my side. A number of the founders we've backed in the last several years and even the last 20 years have been founders who discovered the problem while they were inside another technology company. And they essentially left that company to solve that problem. An example would be we just talked outside about Portkey in the AI gateway space. Rohit and Aayush discovered the problem at their previous company when they were building out agentic applications. And then they came out to solve that problem. And then they just got acquired by Palo Alto Networks. Same thing in Axel Data. Rohit, another Rohit, was at Hortonworks, and he discovered this problem there and came out to solve it. And so it's a very, it's a pattern that happens. What I want to ask you, for those founders out there or prospective founders who are sitting inside larger companies, encountering some of these problems that they can perhaps go and solve, what helped you escape the gravity of that startup that you were at already?
I think all the institutions that I've worked with so far have been phenomenal for my career growth, for building perspective. The people that I've worked with they continue to be mentors, and some of them, many of them, in fact, angel investors. They wrote our first check as well. But I think the point at which, and this is a constant tension that you kind of keep feeling all the time, right? I mean, is because you tend to think in terms of quarters.
Yeah.
And then I think there's an inflection point where you feel like, and this is a place you love. You're talking about a place that you enjoy showing up to work every day. You enjoy working with the people that you work with. But then there's a point where you feel, but this constant tension in your head gets to a point where you feel like, okay, there's this other thing that has captivated me for a while that I'm potentially enamored with, or it's a problem that I really want to solve. I'm itching to solve this problem. And sometimes you start problem solving on the sidelines, you talk to people, you build more perspective, and it gets to a point where the itch to solve that problem becomes too hard to ignore. And when that happens, then I think it's a good time to have an honest conversation with wherever you're working. Take the people that care about you into confidence, and then work it out. I think most of my previous departures have been like that. They've been great places to work. I continue to be friends with all of them.
No, that makes sense. When you came out of the previous company and wanted to get started, sounds like you met your co-founder sort of before that. How did you guys think about it? And again, for the founders out there, how did you think about who would do what in the early days? Let's say the first 6 months. How did you talk about things like division of responsibilities? Who would own how much of the company, all of that stuff. Like, I'm not trying to get into the details of it, but what are some general guidelines that could help founders out there think through those sorts of, not easy to talk about situations?
I think it's easier for me to talk about it in retrospect than because we figured out a lot of things from like in rather difficult ways. But if I reflect, so if I think about my perspective 4 years ago when I came out of McKinsey, there was a certain idea of what an ideal professional should be in my head, and that was like a certain kind of conditioning, right? So very methodical, very fastidious, very organized, very sharp first principles problem solving, a certain way of communicating. And then over time what I realized, and this is something that it's a philosophy, if you will, that we've now pretty much institutionalized as part of our hiring process too. There are people who are tinkerers and alpha generators, who are risk takers, and there are people who are reliable workhorses, right? And conflating the two often leads to fatigue and panic. We now are very conscious of every new member that gets added to a team. Is this person a a tinkerer, a risk taker, an idea generator, or is this person a reliable workhorse who can see things through to the last level of detail? So I think within the founding team, there was within the three of us, there was a healthy mix. I started as the person who could put things together, identify a problem, really think about everything from first principles. Had developed, because of my McKinsey conditioning, had developed the ability to consume large pieces of information, make sense of it, organize it. Kush and Jayesh, on the other hand, both. So Kush brought 15 years of deep experiential understanding of the space that despite my deep attachment to the problem because I felt it firsthand, I couldn't short circuit that process. There was a certain intuition that he had developed from all these years of being an actual practitioner that was very valuable. And we realized that he had to be given the space to exercise that intuition. He can't be too deeply involved in processy stuff or something very deeply operational. He had to be given the room and space to exercise the intuition. Right. For Jayesh was the youngest member in the team, fresh out of college, and he was a tinkerer. He liked working with ideas. He liked working on new problems. He liked solving hard problems. Right. So I think every month we would basically sit down and think about what we're good at, what we're not good at, what's creating fatigue, what's creating panic. We would step back and we would think about, okay. And there were situations where I said, okay, I'll handle the processy stuff for an entire quarter. Just do your thing, right? Even if 2 out of 10 things that you imagine actually work out, we have an alpha. So it's been a continuous learning process. This is a conversation, by the way, we still continue to have every quarter. It's not static because we've evolved as people. Yeah. We've evolved as professionals.
From our perspective, when we looked at the three of you, what we saw was a very classic combination of a domain expert, Kush, in your case, a technical builder, and risk taker, Jayesh, and then you as sort of envisioning the product and the vision and sort of knowing the pain point. And this is a very classic combination in a 3-founder company. Maybe let's talk about building the team out after that. I know you've built out the team here in the US quite broadly. Can you talk a little bit about how you envisioned building out that team? Did you think 2 years ahead, this is what my team needs to be and work backwards? Did you just do it opportunistically as you came across people? How did you think about what sorts of people you needed to add to fill what sorts of gaps in the team? So just talk a little bit about that process.
Sure. So the team has actually evolved since we started, and what we realized was that every stage needs a specific skill set. So, for example, we had the impulse to. So when we got started, we brought a couple of early folks into the team who are pretty much like the founders in the team. So there's Amrita, there's Teja, there's Avnish that came in, Pratap in customer success, and then at various points of time, different people joined. So we now so Pratyush joined us to lead our APAC business, and there was a point when the business scaled very well, and the skill set that is required to take the business off the ground, take risks, work in a very ambiguous, amorphous kind of a setup under a lot of uncertainty. That is predominantly what we were solving for, like very sharp first principles, sort of full stack people who are willing to take risks, very hustly in nature, till the time we got to, let's say, a 5-6 million kind of an ARR threshold. Beyond that point.
And what is it that happened between that 0 to 5 million? What was the change in the organization that you call that 5-6 million a threshold? What was different about reaching that threshold?
So there was a point when we started thinking about systems. And the
systems to scale,
the infra to scale, the systems to scale, processes to scale, and that reflected in everything. The playbook that we follow to hire more AEs, the way we set up our RevOps processes, the way we monitor data to the last level of detail, and we've generally been very data obsessed. The way marketing and sales engage with each other, what cadence needs to get followed. So while the hustle component still stays, but at every stage we get to a point where systems need to be established to prepare us for the next phase of scale.
Okay.
And when we reach that point, I would say when we anticipate that we are maybe 2-3 quarters away from reaching that threshold, that is when we start having honest conversations with people around, okay, how do we change the team, right? And at every stage, the people who are involved are very much a party to that conversation. Sometimes people hire reportees, sometimes people hire their tutors, but it's a very transparent conversation that way. So I think there is a certain amount of experiential intelligence and first principles intelligence both have an equally strong role to play for us when we're thinking about scaling the company. But I think it's important to gauge what role needs what and when. Currently, the way we are structured is almost every important function, be it sales, product management, demand gen, marketing, customer success, has a leader on top, who brings a ton of experiential intelligence based
in that function
based on scaling those functions for a long time. But we also have a sharp -1 or a -2 who's extremely first principles, very scrappy, so that that DNA, that element of experimenting and finding out doesn't disappear, and we don't become overly processy or templatized in an approach. And that is a very healthy tension. That tension exists. Oftentimes it manifests into little skirmishes here and there, but that's all very healthy, because that's how we move forward.
Yeah. Now, you guys have gone exceptionally well. You're heading past 20 million now and growing in this competitive category. Maybe talk a little bit about the category. What is it that Scrut does? What does the category look like? Are there bigger players out there, either in the US or elsewhere in the world? And what is your edge as you come into this market?
The category that we are in is called governance, risk, and compliance. And that has many flavors. Traditionally, it's been very enterprise focused and very horizontal in nature.
Companies like SAP and
SAP,
Archer and so on and so forth.
ServiceNow, they've been in the market for a while. What we do essentially is we don't work with large enterprise customers. Where we see the most amount of opportunities working with mid-size, mid-market companies that are very tech forward. There, two things happen. Actually, there are three patterns there. One is GRC is a lot closer to cyber. It's not as horizontal, because when it comes to risk and compliance, most of what these companies concern themselves with are cyber and IT risks, not so much ESG, operational, financial kind of risks. So it's very close to cyber. Second, the teams are very tech savvy. We're talking about predominantly engineers or people who've done security in a very technical sense. And the third component is the teams are small. So the amount of workload that they have to handle, and typically these are teams where cyber risk, security, compliance are kind of aggregated functions, but the teams are small in proportion to the amount of workload they have to handle. And it's a busy category. There are lots of players out there, and everybody has picked their niches. For us, the problem that we obsess about the most is that when it comes to small or smallish security teams, typically less than 4 or 5 people in a mid-market kind of a setup, in a tech forward company where the workload is actually disproportionate to the size and the capacity available in the team, how do we now use agents to artificially increase that capacity, to make expert capacity in GRC and security available at a fraction of a cost of human FTs, expensive managed services players, in a manner that's readily available to you, that learns in your environment, that actually functions like an expert, that is able to exercise judgment and tonality in tool calls, but it's like having an expert member in your team do stuff for you. And that is where our thesis has also evolved over the last 4 years as the market changed and as AI became more mainstream, because this is something we've obsessed with from the very beginning. Because even when we entered, there was competition in the market, but we felt the big opportunity working with our right to win with our early customers was that our customer success people were all security trained. They were actually practitioners. They were lead auditors in some of the frameworks. And they would think through customers on how to navigate some of the problems. You could generate 100 signals, but what do you do with it? How do you prioritize? How do you define the next steps in a small 2 people team? That's been our obsession. And that's increasingly becoming agentic for us now. So that's where we see the opportunity.
Got it. And since you mentioned the word agentic, can you tell me a little bit about how you think about the addressable market you're going after with agentic sort of solutioning in your product? How does it change the surface area of the market you're going after, and how does it help you address that market?
So when we started, it was predominantly targeting the software spend around compliance and risk management in this part of the market. And software is just a tip of the iceberg. It's probably 10 to 15% of the overall where you would value the problem, because the expertise component of it, in whichever way it manifests, it could manifest through the internal employee TAM. It could manifest in the form of paying expensive consultants, getting fractional labor. It manifests in various ways depending on the company's inclination and appetite. But that coupled with the software TAM actually is a 10x multiplier for the TAM that we're going after. And for us, it's not so much a story around, okay, can we go to a company and reduce their headcount by half? For us, most of the situations that we go into, this workforce doesn't exist. This capacity doesn't exist. And people are actually not able to access GRC and security outcomes that they would like to.
They're not solving a problem that they need to solve. They're not letting it be.
They're not solving a problem that they absolutely want to solve. And they're trying to solve through hacky approaches, point-in-time approaches in a very disorganized manner. So that's the big unlock for us, which is, I would say, roughly 10x of what the original software spend was. And it's becoming increasingly doable because of the way the way LLMs are developing, the way agents are developing. But more on that.
Yeah, we can come back to that in a little bit. Maybe the last question in this first segment I'll ask you is working with investors, um, talking to the financial media out there, and sort of making that work for you and the company in a certain way. I don't want to ask you too general a question, but maybe the question is, in this age of AI, what is it that's important, in your opinion, as you've talked to investors out there? What are they looking for in companies today versus what they were looking for, 4 years ago when you started?
I think generally speaking, there is a so over the last few months, the market's reaction in general to software assets has moved from some bit of hysteria to panic to now a state of genuine curiosity. And I think the bulk of the curiosity in the steady state lies around, will a particular piece of software continue to provide as much value as it did in a manner which is not easily imitable, either because tools are easier to build now,
Mm-hmm.
or because the model providers are natively building certain capabilities. And even there, I think the frame of reference has shifted to evaluating companies as whether this is a workflow on top of a data record, or is this the data record is the primary system of record, or and now there is a flavor around, is this piece of software actually providing outcomes and not just workflows. But the general idea of durability of an asset has now shifted more towards, is this going to be a victim of potential disruption? And we've seen some categories where uh, the bulk of the value accretion was around the dashboards and superficial workflows, and there is some bit of soul searching that they are compelled to do for all the right reasons. I think generally speaking, for us as product builders, a couple of learnings really that we think have become important is the way we thought about product features and telemetry in the CRUD era of software. That has fundamentally shifted. So when we, and a couple of examples there, right? So for example, uh, when we are thinking about certain workflows, we're thinking in terms of loop closures, not in terms of creating a dashboard or generating an answer. We're thinking in terms of loop closures, and
That's
then
kind of the outcome in a sense.
that's a kind of outcome. Yes, what work is getting done when an agent is generating a certain journey? What context is it feeding on? Is that context reinforcing itself every time the agent is completing a loop? And that has an implication of how we think about work and how value accretion happens to the customer. To what extent can the user trust the outcome from the agentic journey? How does that change over time? Does the user have the option to, almost like a slider scale, where they decide on what outcome they want to provide, what level of autonomy to agents? And that's a kind of flexibility that needs to be inherent to the piece of software now. And the other area where I think it has an important implication for us is, how do we think about product telemetry now?
Mhm.
Earlier in the CRUD area, most of it was around number of logins, number of sessions, number of records created. But now it's a lot more about how much context is getting ingested, at what point is the agent completing a loop, where is a human involved in correcting it, is the extent of human involved in correcting a particular journey, is it shrinking over time, which means the agents are now moving more towards autonomy? Are the journeys economical? Are there parts of the journey that can be made more economical by, let's say, using a haiku class model instead of an opus class model, right? So the CX patterns are also evolving. We've seen in our customer base that, so we made our agentic products live about 9 months ago, and since then, roughly about 75% of our current customer base has attached itself to it.
Okay.
But we're seeing very interesting patterns of usage. There are customers that don't even use the Scrut UI anymore. They use our MCP server to access whatever's in the Scrut platform through, depending on the use case. If they want to generate a dashboard or generate a summary, they do it through Claude. Customers who want to pass instructions into Scrut for a work to be done through Slack. So we're seeing very interesting usage patterns also develop, and the way people think of interfaces also kind of develop. So I would say, if the bulk of the value accretion happened through the dashboard, that part is at risk.
Yeah.
So for us also, the question that we keep asking ourselves, how do we get closer and closer to infra while giving the users infinite amount of flexibility in how they can access that information in the first place, right? So I think these are a few thought patterns that have been like pretty important for us, and that also pretty much is in line with how the market is thinking about. I think the primary question here is, nobody knows how this is. All of us probably, we reserve the right to be wrong every 3 months, because there's the pace at which things are happening.
Yeah.
And I think for us, it's, how do we remain adaptive? How do we continue strengthening our intuition? How do we not fall behind? So yeah, I think that's how I would articulate
No, that's
this.
very well put. I think from our perspective, as we see companies at the seed, Series A, Series B stage these days, Durability, of course, as you mentioned, is a question we talk about. Um, we're of course investors. Lightspeed is an investor in Anthropic and so many in Servam in India and so many other foundation model companies, and then infrastructure and applications laid on top of that. That we see sort of what the impact of some of these changes can be in the underlying models on the market. But I think one thing you picked up on, apart from durability, also is the clock speed. I'd almost call it a requirement these days, which is clock speed has speeded up. And a lot of what we are seeing in sort of the best founders out there who are executing today and starting today is just speed of shipping. Um, because the market's moving so fast, one has to ship continually almost. We used to have quarterly release cycles, or I remember annual release cycles when I was a product manager 25 years ago. Um, I think some people are shipping 3 times a day at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah. We have monthly cycles which keep breaking all the time because
Yeah,
we learned something new that we want shipped ASAP.
yeah. One of the other things that seems to have changed is the types of teams that are coming out today versus 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of combinations of product and engineering in the same person because, to some extent, one can build what one wants overnight using, Cloud Code or Cursor or any of these other products. But sort of, what do you think about the future of founding teams, and what sort of what is important to have in those teams going forward for the founders out there looking to start up?
If I reflect on this, right? So if we a few dimensions to this, if you're building B2B software in security or infra for even the slightly sophisticated buyers, not even enterprise, reliability, security, guardrailing becomes very important. While shipping a prototype has become much easier than before, but ensuring security guardrails, ensuring hygiene practices in terms of privacy, reliability, availability has become even more important because the speed at which everybody can ship some code now, but then that code has slop. And the SREs come in, the code has to be refactored, the right security guardrails have to be put in place because ultimately you're selling production grade software to companies in a category where you can't make a lot of mistakes. So engineers are engineers, PMs are PMs. Those roles have continued to remain distinct from each other. However, we do see these two roles meeting each other halfway a lot more often now as compared to before. Because earlier, there was a very traditional cycle where a PM would interview customers, collect information, create a first version of the PRD, put it in the hands of engineers for the first set of feedback, go back and iterate on it. Designs would get created, people would visualize what it looks like, go back and iterate again. That process has shrunk drastically. Now, we expect our product managers to be able to think about these few steps on their own in a matter of days, not in a matter of weeks, where you collect feedback from multiple sources, you have recordings from your Gemini transcripts, you have in-person interview notes from Granola, and you have all these sources. You have signals from your CRM, you have signals from your customer success tool. You take all of that, ship the first version of the PRD, which is super detailed. You can use Claude to adversarially check that and do it in a manner where the work output, which is the PRD that goes to the engineers, is very well thought through with some scenario modeling done, the prototype tested, the CX well imagined. And at that stage, the engineers come in. So the engineers still have to make it bulletproof. They still have to red team it, but the stage at which it comes to them is a lot more reformed and a lot faster.
Mm.
So that's actually, so in summary, what has happened is that the engineers are now spending a lot more time on important questions and not mechanical things like basic QA of the PRD, adding some dimensions that the PM may have missed. And the PMs are also walking half the distance are and creating prototypes and not just early wireframes and
Yeah.
imagining what it would look like. Get some early CX feedback from customers too. So I do see, at least based on our experience, the roles remaining pretty distinct from each other, but working a lot more together. The shipping cycles are much faster. The speed at which collaboration happens is becoming dramatically faster.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Have you seen other examples of AI changing how the company works internally? I get the product manager and the developer sort of interface in a sense has speeded up and become more high quality in a sense. What other parts of a software company changes, and what has changed in your organization?
I think internally speaking, it's pretty pervasive now across functions, especially functions that require a lot of data crunching and analysis and making sense of vast chunks of data, be it in markups, marketing analytics, RevOps, FP&A,
Yeah.
very tiny things like if you have to scenario model based on inputs. We're able to create multiple scenarios in a couple of hours. We don't have to wait for somebody to just go and make long changes to spreadsheets.
Yeah.
What used to be typically a 2-day TAT now has shrunk to a few hours of TAT, with agents doing the work in the background while you're on a call. So, and those little changes compound across teams. But wherever, for us specifically, wherever there is a lot of data crunching involved and analysis involved, we've seen cycle times shrink dramatically.
We've seen a number of portfolio companies, even the ones that are scaled up to like $50-100 million of revenue, their headcount has remained flat for like the last 3 years as they've scaled revenue even further. And the efficiency is just through the roof. I remember maybe 10 years ago, the companies used to do, I don't know, call it $250,000 of revenue per headcount in the company. It's gone to $1 million or more. And I think, there've been a lot of people posting on social media about when we'll have the first $1 billion one person company. And, with OpenClaw and all of these things, I think we've seen that starting to happen already. I'm sure there are plenty of other examples that are happening and we haven't heard about them yet. What do you think about that phenomenon? Again, for the founders sitting out there, do they even need a team? Should they just go from zero to $1 billion themselves? Can they do that?
So there is a dramatic increase in productivity for sure. We've reforecasted our engineering and product hiring several times. And what we've now done in our headcount planning is also explicitly measure the cost of tokens, because there is a spread. There are people who maybe spend $30 a month on tokens. There are people who spend $500 a month on tokens, right? So depending on how deep they're into it, and there are different kinds of people. So
what does that tell you? Measuring, like finding out how much somebody spends on AI.
it tells us the depth and the sophistication of the agentic users, what they do it for typically, because we audit and we look at.
Are you trying to token maximize in a sense? Is that a good thing?
Quite the contrary.
Okay.
We don't want unnecessary use of tokens. We don't want people to. So at every point, we keep auditing what people are using it for, where is value getting created. If value is indeed getting created, how is it impacting our downstream hiring plans, and where can we extract more out of our processes? How is it getting institutionalized? So we're not token maxing, but what I'm trying to say is that there are the extent to which people are using AI to get their work done. There's a spectrum. There's massive heterogeneity in it. There are people who use it incrementally, and there are people who use it very deeply. Uh, the cost implication it will have is that if there could be employees who cost 200K and are ripping 100K on tokens every year, but that's okay. We just want our forecast to reflect that so that we can plan accordingly. But yes, to your earlier question, there is a dramatic increase in productivity for us across functions. Now, that hasn't led us to downsize our teams, but that's led us to add tighter KPIs around the cycle times around how certain things get shipped.
So expectations are higher.
Expectations are higher. Work has to get done faster. And also, I think it's also had some implication on the kind of people that we look to hire now, because there are people in the team who bring very strong experience into their particular functions because they've been doing it for a long time. But their agentic adoption is still at a pace where there is some inertia, some initial friction, but they're great professionals in the verticals that they do. And so we're trying to create a bit of a mix with the very strong experienced practitioner coupled with some Gen Z folks with a lot of alacrity and just always tinkering on agentic use cases, and trying to have a little bit of an osmosis within the teams to find middle ground there. But yeah, I think the short answer is yes, there is a dramatic increase in productivity now. Whether that's going to result in a $1 billion ARR per FT kind of a number anytime soon, I don't have a strong point of view on that. I think in our category that's not going to be the case, but we are seeing a order of magnitude jump in productivity for sure.
I'm seeing sort of 2 or 3 different approaches that drive AI into an organization really quickly. One is just people publishing or talking about things that are making them super productive so that other people learn about it. So there's sort of an osmosis learning oriented thing. You have to arrange that in a company so things can be shared and learned. Certain prompts that they've written in Claude work or whatever it is, and that can be shared. My favorite one these days is one of the ones that works for me is every morning a Claude work opens up, looks at my calendar, figures out all my meetings, and then goes into my granola notes, goes into my past emails, goes into my Google Drive, goes out to the open web, and figures out everything about that person I'm meeting and what I've said to them, what we've talked about in the past, and sort of summarize it, a one pager before I go into a meeting, without me having to try and remember every single thing and then it's prioritized in a certain way, and so on and so forth. So that's super useful. So one is sort of having this learning thing within a company. The second is we've seen people come in and nominate an AI or have an AI person leader come in whose job is to drive usage throughout the organization. Because it's very easy to say, everybody please use models to do something. But then if you actually almost have a KPI around it, that helps in many cases. And then sometimes you hire these sort of folks who are all into it, and just the energy and enthusiasm sort of
That is
infects the rest
infectious.
of the
Yeah, that's quite
company,
infectious. Yeah.
and people adopt it. So we've seen all of those approaches. Maybe switching it a bit from the internal productivity side of AI to the external um, market creation side of AI. How has um, you know the advent of these models over the last few years changed the market opportunity for you? I know you talked a little bit about sort of the processes and workflows versus sort of system of record and so on, but talk about market sizing a little bit specifically in your category, and then we can generalize a bit to other categories that are seeing a similar effect.
So for us, the reason why I say there's been a significant time expansion for us and why models becoming better has been a tailwind for us, because it's going back to the problem that we're trying to solve. We're saying that here are teams that carry a disproportionate amount of security and compliance workload, disproportionate to their size and the amount of expert capacity available in the team. How do we bridge that gap using agents in a manner where expert capacity is available on demand at
Yeah.
a price which is pragmatic, which is reasonable, and they have some degree of control and flexibility over, right? So that's the primary problem we're trying to solve with agents. And models becoming inherently better has been a good tailwind for us. The cost of inference going down, models becoming better at inference,
Yeah.
us having multiple options. The part where, but models natively can't solve this problem for us because there is a lot of context involved. So for us, the the scaffolding really is around how much context do we capture, how do we invoke it across various agentic journeys, and every time an agentic journey gets completed, it invokes a certain context and also creates some as it completes. There's a learning loop.
So there's kind of, yeah, a loop that
There's a
sort
loop,
of
and we have a dedicated setup spread across US and India of practitioners that run our reinforcement learning loops. So that when traces get generated, those traces gets prioritized. If there is improvements needed on the tone and the quality of judgment, it gets routed to actual security and GRC practitioners. That's a dedicated team for us. 50% of what they do is customer facing, so that they're constantly in touch with the problems customer face, and 50% of what they do is making the outcomes better through our RL loops. And wherever we see there's a gap in plumbing or better scaffolding that needs to be done, there is a dedicated engineering team that runs those loops.
Yeah.
So the models they run the inference for us, but the scaffolding on top is where we build the most of our IP, and that context is pretty native to us. So I think the way we
I had a question on that. Is there a difference in your mind between a data flywheel, which is I think what you were describing, and a context flywheel, or is the one and the same thing? Because a lot of the founders we meet talk about data flywheels. Context consists of data.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
I'm trying to think about, and the definitions are also pretty.
How do you define it? Yeah.
For us, the way we think about context is, so there are three very specific kinds of context traces. One is activities that a user carries out on the platform. When I approved a particular policy, when I added a particular comment, when I responded to an audit query, when I overrode a decision that came on the platform, when I uploaded something, when I created a ticket against something, that's actual explicit user action that generates a trace which essentially becomes a memory of that action. So that every time an agent invokes it later, it knows what the user preferences were. The second kind of context element is tests that run in the background like cron jobs automatically. There's a cadence, there is a periodicity. Every time that that action gets completed, there is a context trace that gets generated. The third kind is the reinforcing kind, where we're saying that if there's an agentic loop that has to invoke a certain part of that context to complete the loop reliably. When it does complete the loop, it feeds back to that. It creates a context trace that feeds back to that body of context. And there are multiple ways to capture it, because it's a bit of an amorphous term. In certain cases where you see that having a knowledge graph kind of a structure is very important, you use a Neo4j or an AWS Neptune. The hops are very complicated. Retrieval time is important. The data is very big. You use knowledge graph. In some cases, you can just use PostgreSQL with some additions to it to be able to manage time series data. So there are a variety of approaches, and we also use a very hybrid kind of an approach. We keep it very pragmatic, always making a trade-off between the speed of the retrieval, the quality of retrieval, and also there are optimizations that always need to be done, because you can't, every time a journey completes its loop, you can't dump the entire context into it. That kind of defeats the purpose. How do you optimize a context packet and do selective retrieval in a manner where
Yeah.
you get to the outcome quicker? So these are engineering problems that we have to keep doing all the time. So context for us has become a bit of an umbrella term, depending on where that trace is getting generated from and what part of the user's experience is it going to significantly strengthen. It gets invoked and created in a different way, but there is a dedicated team that's entirely dedicated to managing this part of the operation, the context team,
Building the
essentially.
brain in
Yes,
a
correct.
sense.
Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
and that's something that compounds. What it allows us to do is to ensure that a user that's using Scrut in year 3, their experience of using it will not be the same as what it was in year 1, because that context has accumulated over a long time. Those traces have accumulated over a long time.
And in some sense, I mean,
Yeah.
this is where we used to have, all the movies about Skynet and all taking over, in a sense, was about how AI could sort of learn not only from interacting with one person, but interacting with everybody. The learnings would cross pollinate, in a sense.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys think about as well? How do you cross pollinate learnings between different customers that you serve?
There are
There's
some.
obviously confidentiality and
Yeah, yeah,
data
yeah.
that cannot be shared. I mean, at the
Correct,
end of
correct,
the day,
correct.
there's security, but is there anything that can be cross
Oh yeah, yeah,
pollinated?
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
So, and that's the intent behind the RL loops in the first place, right? Because our infosec analysts, they work with multiple customers. So learnings from one customer are pretty much, there are things that can be globalized across
Generalized,
tenants.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And even when we're feeding examples, those examples are not actual examples from with actual customers' information. We use one customer situation to generate multiple synthetic examples. Then that kind of gets used for post training. So I think there are two kinds of expertise elements that gets compounded, right? So one is global. So I mean, the frameworks themselves undergo changes, new versions of them get launched, the nuances around it change. The same framework has two additional controls that correspond to AI systems. Those are changes which are very externally facing, and we have a research team which is directly led by Kush that makes sure that we're always in touch with what's latest and greatest out there. The other kind of expertise element is the one that you mentioned, where if we work with 3,000 odd customers and growing, if there are certain situations that are replicable across tenants, but we've learned it with a few tenants, how do we replicate that? Of course, with the guardrails being in place, data has to be obfuscated, anonymized, sometimes synthesized. So to ensure that there's no cross pollination in a bad sense
Yeah.
across customers.
Yeah. Maybe where I'll go now is sort of just AI in general a little bit. I mean, the pace of startup venture creation has also gone up. I remember when we were starting up in 1999. I'm really dating myself at this point. We had to buy servers from Sun Microsystems to then go put in some data center somewhere, and then we had to buy application servers to sit on those servers, and then we had to write code that went and sat on those application servers, and so on and so forth. It cost like $5 million just to get a company
Yeah.
website live. I mean, it was kind of ridiculous if you think about it from today's perspective. Today, it's, I don't know, it's a one-shot command to one of the foundation models, and you're up and running, right? For, I don't know, $100 or $10 for that matter, right? We've got a company in our portfolio, Emergent, that's also doing this vibe coding for small
Yeah.
businesses. It's very different right now. So, what is it that are the keys to success, you think, now in this broader AI world, generally for companies?
I think one fundamental difference we observe now, and I have personally observed now because I've seen several cycles. So 5 years ago, I would meet people with phenomenal ideas, great clarity of thought, and urge to solve something in a particular space that they've experienced problems in. But then there would be conversations around, I can't find a CTO to help me get started. I can't find an engineering co-founder. I've moved mountains to find an engineering co-founder, but I can't find one. And then when they would do that for long enough, the enthusiasm would die down, they would move on with their lives, and those ideas would die with them, right? I think that will happen less and less, because people who have very sharp insights about a problem and an urge to solve that problem will find it a lot easier to enter that space, at least get started. There is no longer an excuse to not get started. Getting the first few customers, building a version that is good enough to solve problems for a few customers, to get very meaningful feedback, get it to a stage of refinement where it will probably still not be production ready to be deployed across thousands of customers, but good enough to nail down exactly what parts of the problem will now generate PMF and therefore alpha.
So now, therefore, you're going to see, before you might have had 10 startups per category, you'll see 100.
Which is
Yeah.
quite possible, honestly. And switching costs are because of the sheer number of alternatives present. There might be tensions around retention, switching costs, and stuff like that. But I think, especially in a B2B enterprisey infra like context, which is the space that I can speak to because of what I do here, is that getting something off the ground, getting the first few million in revenue is something that is becoming very easy to do. Lots of startups would come up in a particular space. But beyond that point, it requires you to build systems which are scalable. It requires you to build reliability. You have to take care of latency, security, privacy, all of those things which require expertise. And at least the way I see it happening is that at the there's going to be a big funnel of startups in a particular category. Lots of people would attempt to build startups in a particular category, and many would. Many You'll probably see many startups getting to the $4-5 million ARR scale because they built something quick and scrappy and found the early set of customers. But the ones that break out in a category, the ones that probably durably get to a 50, 60, $70 million ARR scale, will necessarily have to build those systems that make it reliable. And so the teams that are able to access the talent, attract the talent to be able to do that, to build the scalable systems, there the funnel will start narrowing, right? If there are multiple companies in a category that have 5 million ARR threshold, the best talent will gravitate towards the best teams. So ability to attract that talent that can build scalable systems is, I think, is going to become a differentiator. And that has multiple elements. How are you as a leader? How you build a culture? I mean, what kind of capital do you have access to? So multiple dimensions to it.
Almost every founder we backed has sort of a thought on how the infrastructure of that category should get built out. And they're trying to build that out as much as possible, whether it's the data infrastructure, the context graphs that they're building out, what they're making available to other applications through APIs, and so on and so forth. And so it's become more infrastructure
Yeah.
rather than pure workflow. And what we're also seeing is people really, the shipping fast is not sort of a standalone sort of feature of a company anymore. There's a reason to do that, which is things are moving so fast. You need to be ahead of the curve.
You fight obsolescence all the time.
You fight it like that curve, that obsolescence, half life is shortened dramatically nowadays. Another way of saying that is,
So the order of weeks now, by the way, that's how I put it.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, it used to be what, a year maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, it's come down dramatically fast. Another way of putting that is, one of the common playbooks we're seeing in this sort of AI native world is companies start out with a narrow wedge, right? They land a bunch of customers, and then the customers view them as their AI vendor, and then ask them to build adjacent features, and that's the roadmap that these companies end up having, right? What we're finding in this day and age is that core wedge that you land with has a very short half life, and starts commoditizing very quickly. And so building out the other features is not just a response to what your customers want, it's a way to stay relevant and be able to charge and keep your ARPUs or whatever ACVs or whatever way pricing is done these days high enough so that you can build, a high revenue and value creating company. Because if you wait, let's say a year to get beyond that commodity landing sort of feature, either the incumbents will catch up, or the other AI native startups would have shipped faster and caught up and built beyond that.
People will build a version of it themselves.
Or people will build it themselves. So I think that's a very different dynamic today. Every few weeks, the world changes, and I know for me, it's driving a lot of stress because for us, we back a team, they build something, and they have to build even faster to stay relevant in the future.
That's also one of the reasons why when we're building out our teams right now, we try to maintain a healthy balance between people who are very much a part of the zeitgeist, people who've grown up in this generation where, I mean, they graduated from college when ChatGPT was already mainstream, or maybe just before that. And then there is a certain instinct, there is a certain intuition that's very important to have. That energy is important to have, but also balance it with just general experiential expertise, big picture thinking. So I think we try to maintain that healthy tension across teams, because that instinct is important, because they usually become the source of ideas for us.
The people who've been there for a while.
No, the people who are born in the professional career is born in the AI native era.
You find those sorts of people are different, and again, I'm not trying to generate stereotypes here, but what is it that what sorts of things come out of those folks who've grown up AI native, I guess.
So I think those people have just, so their professional career has it's pretty much born in the AI native era. So we see a lot of energy, we see a lot of alacrity in learning new things. They're always exchanging notes with each other. They're always on Reddit, Substack. The conversations are like, and so sometimes a little bit more disorganized as compared to their earlier, the more mature peers, because the attention spans are shorter, because there's so much information, so many new things, but they're always tinkering. And I think the balance there is what the experienced people bring into the team is making sure that they're not always chasing only shiny objects, making sure they stick with the problem long enough and see it through uh, before getting enamored with something else. So those tensions exist, and that's just a very healthy tension, I think. But having that balance has actually worked well for us.
Cool. Maybe the last 5 minutes we'll talk about sort of the US and how you are setting up for success in the US, leveraging sort of the operations that you have back in India. Maybe talk about a little bit about that. How have you architected the company in a way that spans both these countries to serve your customers who are mainly in the US? What are some of the learnings again for founders who might be operating, Europe to US, Israel to US, India to US, and so on? What are some of the learnings on building these sort of cross-border type of companies?
So I think the design principle we generally followed is that every team, as I mentioned earlier, has a leader who's deeply experienced in the domain that they've been in. They've seen the function evolve through multiple years and across stages, and their primary job is to think 4 quarters ahead all the time. What do we need to prepare ourselves for? What can we forecast? What can we anticipate now? What will break when we get to say 2x the scale from where we are, and preparing ourselves? Because some of these change management does take time. We get a few things wrong, we course correct. But there is also a leadership element in the team, typically the minus ones or 10 odd people, 10 odd ICs in the team, whose primary job is to think about the now, because the future can't come at the cost of now. Which means that when we talk about sprint planning, releases, demand gen experiments, what's working, the immediate ad campaigns, how they're performing week on week. So that's the brain that gets involved there. I think for me, it's been an important learning that these two functions need to be constantly communicative with each other, but they need to they exist distinctly. The part where we're thinking 4 quarters ahead is that leadership is predominantly based here in the US. So the product function has a VP in the US, the sales function has a VP in the US, the channel function has a head in the US. Our CISO, who's deeply involved in engineering, very product facing and tinkering, he's also in the US.
And what sorts of backgrounds what sorts of companies have they come from?
It's a
Yeah.
mix. So I think our so Akhil, our VP of product, he was a VP at Fastly. Before that, he was a senior director at Palo Alto Networks. Nick, who's our security head, is in Seattle. He was at the Department of Homeland Security. Was with Expedia as a security engineer before that, and also had a brief stint as a CISO at another Series C, Series D stage company. Nick Huberty, who's our VP of Sales, he used to be Drata's VP of Sales in North America, I knew earlier. So he brings functional experience of selling, but also domain expertise in this category, generally speaking. So, and Drata is one of our competitors. So almost all the people that we've hired in the leadership team have some exposure to working in a large company environment. So they've been exposed to the best in class processes, but they've also had situations where they've either been in smaller outfits where they necessarily had to take risks and had to deal with the consequences of some of their decisions going wrong, or at least lead a small outfit or create a small outfit ground up within a larger company where they still had to exercise that muscle of taking risks and having seeing some of the decisions go wrong. And that's a flavor that we consciously like to solve for, because systems thinking is important, and sometimes no amount of first principles thinking can beat the best in class exposure that you have, seeing a Palo Alto or an Expedia function. But there should be enough evidence of people having taken risks and have some of the decisions go wrong, because then that builds a certain comfort with uncertainty that's just very hard to artificially inculcate.
What we find usually is a great set of a type of founders that we back up, folks who've joined a company in the first 5 years of a company that has actually scaled up really well. And those 5 years, if the founders of those companies gave those folks enough leeway or delegated enough authority to take decisions, some of which they got right, some of which they got wrong, but they learned from it, in strategic situations,
Yeah.
then we find those folks make great founders
Yeah, and one of
over
the
time.
luxuries that I have had as a founder is to be able to hire tutors for myself, people who deeply experienced in the stuff they do, people who've had years of muscle memory of making some of these mistakes, recovering from it,
Yeah.
learning from their experience. So I think
Yeah.
the team has been designed like that. The
Maybe
bulk, yeah,
one last thing to touch on is sort of, as you thought about expanding across the US, how did you think about advisors to help you? One specific to Scrut, but more broadly for other founders who are doing that. Who are these advisors? Like, where do they come from? How do you find them?
we find them through a variety of. Sometimes our colleagues bring people they know from the industry. Sometimes these are people that we access through our investor network. But broadly, two flavors. Ones that are coaches to specific people in the team. Like I've met phenomenal people that are now on our advisory board that I can be very comfortable being vulnerable to. Here's a problem. I'm a little stuck. Help me think through this. You would have seen this multiple times. So they're coaches to me and to my other co-founders.
Yeah.
So they bring something which is beyond just the functional expertise within a particular thing. Then there are advisors who've been very invested in how the product has evolved, the problems we've solved. And so, for example, we have a couple of advisors in the US whose primary job is to red team all major releases. So before something becomes live for GA, we take it to them and we say, your job is to spend a couple of hours on this and completely diss us. It's like call out everything that's not right here in as brutal a manner as possible. And then we would take that feedback. And it's been, instead of accumulating shallow feedback from multiple people in a manner where they're not fully invested, we found concentrating that feedback with a few people who are exposed to a variety of
Yeah.
tools and techniques in the market is actually pretty helpful. So we solve for depth there. Then the third kind really is a variant of the second kind, which is functional advisors, people who've led demand gen functions at other security companies or infra companies before, who are also constantly evolving themselves. So they've done things a certain way, but we not only get access to their functional expertise, but also their network. The people they've mentored, people they've worked with in the past,
Yeah.
or also, so then that body of knowledge, that network also becomes accessible to us, and they're always happy to make these introductions.
Back to that first kind you mentioned, I mean, we see this quite often, folks who've been in the industry that the startup is targeting, and they've risen, they're usually sometimes close to retirement, or and they really know everybody in that industry and are part of the network of sort of, call it the old boys network or the old girls network, or the old people's network. But they know everybody and they can make those trusted introductions and open doors for you. Of course, the startup has to walk through that door and then actually make the sale or the partnership or whatever it is. But that's invaluable, especially for companies that are building cross border. That has been invaluable, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in
Yeah,
security,
yeah.
whether it's in financial services. All of these are areas that require sort of domain expertise in a sense, and relationships. And those relationships can't be manufactured through advertising or content marketing and so on. Those are just literally in-person relationships built out through
Absolutely.
these advisors. So
Absolutely.
that's been a pattern as well. Well, thank you so much, Ayush. Appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your learnings and of course for the partnership over the last 4 years and the next many more years.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.